Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good rest, Mr. Chongan. We tasked you a whole lot yesterday. But before we proceed, may I ask our religious leaders to lead us to lead the prayers. Please. Imam C. Yeah, Imam C.
لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين وإن تستفتحوا فقد جاءكم الفتح نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس مالك الناس إله الناس من شر وسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Shukran. Thank you very much, Imam C. Bishop.
Gracious and eternal Father, we continue to thank you for seeing us through yesterday and for bringing us again to the beginning of another day. We give ourselves unreservedly under your direction, protection, and the Lord, that you will guide and direct all the proceedings of the TRRC. By your goodness and your mercy, you will grant that the hills will be wounded. All hearts, merciful Father, will be comforted by you, and the reconciliation will be made possible by your grace, so that all of us in the Gambia will live as one family, one big family, brothers and sisters together. Help us in our task as we seek to establish the truth. This we ask in your Son's name, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. We will continue our consideration of the main agenda item before the Commission, and that is the hearing involving witness Mr. Ebrima Chongan. Thank you very much, for setting the scene for us to start with what happened in July 1994. That is a good starting point on what is to come the next 22 years. We shall continue the proceedings that way. Lead Counsel, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chongan, I hope you have rested well. Welcome back to this hearing. May I kindly remind you that you are still under oath? And may I remind everyone here present to turn off their mobile phones, observe decorum that is expected, and also avoid using electronic gadgets to record these proceedings. If you want to have a record of the proceedings, please approach the media unit of the TRRC, and they will be obliged to provide the material. Mr. Chongan, yesterday you talked about the events that happened prior to July 22nd, 1994, and you explained everything that you know about the coup, the things that happened to you and your colleagues while in detention at Mile 2 prison. And your testimony went as far as your appearance before the Carnifing Magistrates Court, where you yelled across to your wife and asked her to inform lawyer Usman Silla that he needed to represent you. You agree that we've covered that much in yesterday's proceedings?
Yes.
Before we resume discussing what happened regarding your case or the charges that were leveled against you. I would wish to clear a few issues or that still need further elucidation, such that we can clear certain doubts or certain missing gaps that are in the record. And I want to look at 4 different areas, just to prepare your mind for that. I want to talk about what happened at the airport. I want to talk about what happened to certain officials in the army after your incarceration. I want to talk about the whereabouts of the IGP and President Jawara soon after the coup was announced. I'd also want to talk about the U.S. Gambia military drill that was supposed to occur on the day of the coup itself. And the 5th point would be the relationship between the prisoners and some of the prison officers as at the time you were in detention. Would you be prepared to discuss those?
Yes, Counsel.
The first point is to do with the events at the airport. Just to recap, yesterday in your testimony, you indicated that as AIG, that is Assistant Inspector General of Police for Operations, it was your responsibility to supervise the activities of the police at the reception of the President when he arrived from England. That's right.
No, let me clarify. The President has his presidential guard who were not under me. And the tactical support group and the general duty, obviously, and the area is under my command for policing issues. So we just need to clarify that. But certainly, I should be there. I should be at the airport.
And your presence there was not just ceremonial. It was as part of your responsibilities as AIG for operations. Is that right?
Yes.
You also, so you indicated to us that it was unusual that you were asked not to attend on that particular day.
Yes.
You also indicated that it was unusual that the soldiers who were present were asked to show that their weapons did not contain live ammunition.
Yes.
Apart from those 2 unusual events, do you recall any other unusual activity or unusual event that occurred on that particular day?
Yes, I mean, I have to also bearing in mind that I was not present, but I subsequently knew what happened, because everybody knew about it, that the vice president at the time was not there when the president arrived, and also it was unusual for, as you rightly articulated, for the military to be humiliated there, for them to show their weapons that they didn't have any weapon. And also, everybody knew there was a rumor of coup. Why, after the guard of honor, why did they just allow the suspected officers just to go and just fall out? And then they come back the following morning to start this mutiny, which will eventually lead to a coup.
You talked about the vice president not having been present at the event. Was his presence required?
Well, if the president travels, the vice president is de facto acting as a president. And when the president comes, the vice president should be there.
Are you suggesting that protocol required that the Vice President be present?
Correct.
Do you recall the name of the Vice President at the time?
The Vice President was Honorable Sehu Sabali.
I would now move on to the next point. In your testimony, you indicated that after you returned from the brief skirmish you had with the coupists, you managed to find your way through Bond Road back to police headquarters. And I asked you the question whether you saw the IGP when you arrived at the police headquarters, and your answer was no. Is that right?
Yes, that was correct.
Did you eventually find out where he went?
Yes. At the time, I didn't know until I went to Tobacco Road where I was staying. It was later I realized that the government, the president and the IG and some senior officials have boarded the Nigerian vessel, County Lamore. If you recall, in my testimony, I did indicate that there was supposed to be a joint exercise between the Americans and the Gambian Armed Forces when the day before Colonel Salute came to my office and Captain Samsudin Sar at the time to inform me about the exercise so that we can warn our units at Denton Bridge. So it was in the weekend that I realized that the officials have gone, including the IG. They bought the ship and left.
May I draw your attention to paragraphs 29 and 30 of your statement? Could you read out those two paragraphs, and then I would ask follow-on questions?
Paragraph 29, I wrote, I heard that President Jawara knew nothing about the precarious security situation that was in the country on the day of his return from London, Thursday evening.
Could you kindly slow down as you read out the paragraph, please? Thank you.
Okay. On Friday morning, he went to his office looking forward to business as usual. Then some senior officials, the NSS National Security Service Director and Vice President Sehu Sabali of his government came to advise him to leave for the U.S. naval ship. When he asked for explanation, the collective response was, don't put your family at risk. After they explored the implications of the military insurgency that was underway, he considered to leave for the naval ship with the understanding that if the rebel soldiers overran all the security forces, he will be able to make the necessary contacts for the visiting U.S. Navy to intervene and cross the mutiny. But nothing of that sort would happen. In fact, I understand that after the president, his family, and a handful of senior officials, including the Inspector General of Police, were on board, the then U.S. Ambassador to the Gambia, Mr. Andrew Winter, informed him that Washington had to approve any intervention by the American Navy. The rebel soldiers had already taken over the State House, and by 6 p.m. they announced the coup on Radio Gambia. Officials in Washington wouldn't authorize the Navy to intervene in what they considered a domestic matter. The word from Washington became the death knell for President Jawara's 3 decades-long presidency. The president was left with negotiating with the coup leaders for his return, but the effort became futile. On Sunday, the naval ship left the Gambian waters for the Senegalese capital, Dakar, and the Senegalese authorities offered President Jawara asylum, the Navy ship proceeded to their next port of call.
As far as you know, is this a true and correct recollection of what actually happened on that day?
Yes, this was a true collection. The president left with some senior officials, including the IG. They left on the naval ship, and there was an attempt for the president to talk with the juntas, and I think he spoke to one of them.
You were certainly not present when these events happened. Can you tell us how you got to know about this?
I got to know about this from Captain Gassama, who was the ADC of President Jawara. And Captain Gassama was living in exile with me in the United Kingdom.
You told us that when you arrived at police headquarters, your boss, who had ordered you to go to the bridge and fight, was not present. How did you feel when you eventually learned that he went on board the vessel with Jawara offshore out of the jurisdiction?
Well, I was not pleased. I was very shocked. But I mean, the reasons you will have to ask him. But for me personally, I felt bad.
I wouldn't ask you why you felt bad. I would move on to the next point. On the day of the coup, there was to be a military drill between the Gambia Armed Forces and the U.S. Marines. That's what you testified to earlier. Is that right?
Correct.
Could you explain what was the nature of this exercise?
Sorry to interrupt you, Counsel, but before you proceed on that particular point, Mr. Chongan, can you recall what Gassama told you? Maybe Gassama would come. He can probably clarify these points for us. But what was the nature and the means of communication between the former president and the coup leaders?
Well, the Americans had their ship. They will have their means to communicate, because, I mean, they did communicate, and their ambassador was around. And, you know, the Americans will definitely have capabilities to be able to do that.
Thank you. You may continue, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And my question was, what was the nature of this military exercise?
Yes, as I explained before, during that time, every couple of years, the Americans do what they call a West African training tour, where they will exercise with the various navies, Senegalese Navy, Gambian Navy, all the countries are going in the coast. In fact, a couple of years before 1994, there was an exercise around the Mandinari area, and I was an umpire with Captain Omar Faye. In fact, that time I think Jammeh was a sergeant in the military police, and he was there. And when I say Jammeh, I mean Jammeh. So, but this time, what was different is that the exercise was going to be in an urban setting, because I think the American brought in some amphibious landing vehicles. So that was that was the major difference, because this time it was in an urban setting, and with all the implications it will have.
What are the implications that you have in mind?
Well, that was the reason that Colonel Salib came to my office to tell us, because, you know, in the urban setting, you know, the vehicle, a lot of civilians around, etc.
Can you further explain what you mean by urban setting? How was this to affect daily lives of people?
Yes, I mean, the urban setting of the exercise around Denton Bridge, etc. Denton Bridge is the main link to the capital. So, you know, there would be major traffic difficulties, etc. That's what I was alluding to.
Was it contemplated that this military exercise would impact on the movement of people?
Correct, that's what I said, movement of people and goods.
Was it also contemplated that this military exercise would involve movement of troops within the city?
Yes, that's what I said, with the amphibious landing, the vehicles, you know, armed soldiers, etc. So that is what I'm trying to explain.
I am trying to understand the scenario that would be created with such an exercise. Correct me if I'm wrong. Would it imply having a lot of movement of men in military uniform carrying weapons running after each other within the city?
Yeah, yes, you're right. And around Denton Bridge is a major urban area.
And you said this scenario was different from what used to happen. Is it correct that this is the first time, or that was the first time when such a training exercise was held in Gambia?
No, I mean, the setting was different, but I did mention before that I participated in an exercise a couple of years before. Yes, and I think now there was a lot of rumors after the coup whether the Americans were involved or they are not involved or they should have stopped it, etc. My view is that it's a coincidence, but you know, it's for historians to research and judge. I can only say what I know.
Thank you, Mr. Chongan, for that clarification. That was going to be my next question. You preempted it well and answered it. So thank you very much for that. We have addressed three of the main points for clarification. In your testimony yesterday, you talked about the head of the army, Mr. Babukar Jata, and Mr. Dennis Coker, who was, I think, major at the time, visited at the prison. Do you know whether Dennis Coker is still in the army?
No, Dennis Coker is not in the army. Dennis Coker would later, I think the last thing he couldn't handle was after the death of Haidara, which we will come in prison, when he went and saw the body. So Dennis would eventually leave the army and go to America. And I found that a very courageous thing, a very conscientious officer, because he was here, #2 in the army, with all the privileges, and he left that. I think that was a very honorable act.
What was the honorable act you're talking about is that he left the army. Do we know why he left?
Yeah, he left the army because he couldn't take it anymore. He has seen how senior officers have been detained, humiliated, and all this detention, etc. He could have played along like the majority of the officers and every plea as if you've seen or you've not heard nothing. So that is why in my book, he's a very honorable officer. That's what an officer should do, not to condone or join illegality.
How do you know that he left because of this particular reason?
Yes, I mean, remember, we all are in exile, and we have spoken on several occasions, and he has explained he couldn't take it anymore.
So you mean that Mr. Coker himself told you that this was his reason for leaving the army?
Yes, that's what I just said.
Now let's talk about life in the prisons. You have mentioned a number of names of officers at the prison, and you mentioned one Thomas Jaju, you have mentioned Ismaila Sanyang, you have mentioned Buba Jata alias GV Paint, Malang Sidibe, Per Marong, Antu Sedi, and David Colley. Do you remember mentioning these individuals?
Yes, correct.
How come you're still able to remember the names of these individuals? Is there any particular reason?
Well, I mean, this is a fundamental time, an impact on my life. And I knew some of the officers like Mr. Marong and Antu Sedi. Antu Sedi, we are all of the same generation, and we used to meet every Friday. They come to my house, and we were basically friends. But for Thomas Jaju and David Colley, particularly Thomas Jaju, he made us suffer. He dehumanized us and refused us sour, like what I testified yesterday. So, and also it was a bad and a very wicked coincidence, because they all, him and I think David Colley, they all came from Kanilai. So they saw this as their government. So you can see how unlucky we were. But as I mentioned yesterday, there were also very good officers who were humane. They couldn't do anything because they didn't detain us, but they were humane, like Sidibe I mentioned, Malang Sidibe. And there was another guy called Minteba, but I can't remember his name. He was also a very, very, very sympathetic officer. And yes, David Colley also was not very helpful, but he was a little bit higher up because we had direct contact with Thomas, where for months when we were isolated after September 6, nobody comes to see us except him. For Buba Jata, as I said, he's a very humane guy. He was the prison medic who used to come with the ink. You know, I don't know whether it has already. All of us, when we grow in the Gambia, if you have a wound, they used to put that ink in the cotton and put it in the wound, in your wound, and this is called GB Fen, gentle something, the correct name. For Ismaila Sanyang, we grew up in Latrikunda, so probably that's why he was a little bit more sympathetic. In fact, I remember once in the prison where Thomas Jata said in Mandinka, I don't know whether I will know it properly, Balaya Lofo, Balahama, Balaya Longo Noma or something, meaning, you know, you have sympathy to somebody you know. You know, so you can see the situation. So that is what happened.
Is it your suggestion, therefore, that Mr. Thomas Jaju contributed to the inhumane treatment of the prisoners at Mile 2 prison, including yourself at the time?
Yes, but I can talk with absolute certainty for myself and Captain Charm. Nobody would deny somebody to have a shower for 1 month, especially somebody who has gone through a mock execution, and then afterwards once a week before it went on a daily basis. Nobody. That is not in the rules of the prisons. I'm very aware of the rules because I was a police officer, and we were not convicted prisoners. So, you know, we should have been giving our clothes. I should have been giving my clothes, and we were detainees. We are entitled for our families to send us provisions so that we can have it. So, keeping the provisions, etc., that is inhumane and unjust.
Talking about provisions that family members would or would not bring to you, could you explain what happened on that issue with regards to you, provisions that may have been sent to you by your family members?
Yes, I mean, when we were isolated, my wife still continued to bring provisions, you know, coffee, biscuits, sardines, and corned beef. That's why I still hate sardines and corned beef. I don't even want to see it, because that's the only better food you can eat. So most of those things, when we were detained and when we were transferred to security wing number 1, it's not filtering through to us. It was only subsequently when I came to going to court and I spoke to my wife, and he said he was constantly coming. I say, oh, me, I didn't see it that time. But after, when we came back to security wing number 4, the provisions were coming normally.
Did you ask anybody what happened to the provisions that were being sent to you in prison while you were in security wing number 1?
No, we pleaded. I did mention yesterday when I think it was Ismail Sanyang Stone, when a pot of coffee slipped through. And now we beg to have hot water, so that now we started having hot water every morning. You know, nobody gives you any answer. And also, you have to understand, in that context, it's very difficult. You are powerless. You are a prisoner. You are at the mercy of the prison guards.
Just trying to understand the system that operates at the prison. Could you explain the problems surrounding provisions or monies sent to the prison for the benefit of prisoners? This is important because at some stage this commission may have to look into institutional reforms, and we cannot do that if we do not understand the problems. So I want you to explain your understanding of what happens in the prisons regarding provisions or monies sent to detainees by members of their families.
Well, I mean, it's a very difficult thing, and also you have to look at it in the context. I don't know now, but before, prison wardens were not properly paid. And to be fair, this is just not a Gambian problem. This is prisons all over the place. If you don't pay the prisoners, there will be smuggling. I think that's what you want me to illustrate. And also, I'm not sure whether detainees are allowed to get money. But we had some good prison wardens who would help us, so that you can have food or special food. And I have to be brutally honest, we had to smuggle food. I mean, under normal circumstances, they should have allowed our families to cook for us. But, I mean, if you don't get money you won't get food that comes from, and it's not even every day. That's maybe every couple of weeks you will be lucky. So there were even other issues, because when I was in the prison, I was shocked to even know that in the prison they are selling drugs, cannabis. Some prisoners are allowed. So that is why institutional reforms are very important, so that prison wardens are properly paid, properly trained. So there were challenges. And wherever you go, there were some people who were very wicked, and some people who were humane, and some people who basically were opportunists. They just saw it as an opportunity to make money out of the detainees.
In a sense, you are telling us that during your time at Mile 2, there was a lot of corruption.
Yes, correct.
Corruption among prison officers.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, the detainees are not that quite innocent also, because they are giving money, so it's a difficult thing.
Okay, thank you for those clarifications. We now move back to the criminal charges that were leveled against you. And in your testimony, we discussed up to the point you were taken at Kanifing Magistrates Court. I know, Mr. Chongan, that also in your testimony, you had discussed the fact that there was a consolidation of 2 charges against you, and the case was ultimately transferred to Mr. Bori Toure. But that part of the testimony seemed to have been rushed. So I want us to take it a little more sequentially and step by step. We also note that your statement really constitutes what I may describe as a prison diary. Is that correct?
Correct.
So explain a little bit about the diary. Why would you call it a diary?
I call it a diary because I was recording things contemporaneously, as I indicated before and submitted the manual written notes, sending out. That is why I'm able to capture date, time, and people.
Significant is the issue of the dates. So I would want us to go through the dates you have recorded, and then you would discuss with us the events that you had recorded in your diary about those particular dates. You understand me? Let's start with paragraph 140 of the statement. That is 27 March 1995. This would have been after 9 months of detention. Could you explain what happened?
Yes. On this day, we appeared in Magistrate Chris Onia's courtroom, and the courtroom was full to capacity, and this was and our lawyers were there. So our lawyers were applying for bail, and my lawyer was lawyer Usman Silla, and we all. He was very optimistic. He thought that the magistrate will grant bail, even though I wasn't optimistic. So, do you want me to read 141?
What does 141 entail? But perhaps maybe first of all answer this question. Was bail granted on that particular day? The 27th March.
No, bail was not granted. That was the application, and the application was on that day, on the 27th March. So it will on 10 April, that where the magistrate will make a decision.
And can you tell us what happened on 10 April?
Yeah, on 10 April, as I said, as Magistrate Onya rejected the bail application based on certain provisions laid down in the military decrees number 2, 3, and 26 of the Armed Forces Provisional Ruling Council. In delivering his ruling, the magistrate reiterated that he wouldn't want to portray his court as an elephant in clay feet.
You did testify about this earlier, and you made that same exact quote.
Yeah.
But how did you view that decision?
I view it that the magistrate was giving the junta a way out. I think he should have granted bail so that we know what happens, whether they will release us or they don't release us. And I think this is very fundamental and important for the independence of the judiciary and for the judiciary to take responsibility, because this is the telltale signs at the beginning where we would go to a stage where there is total abdication of responsibility.
Following this decision by the magistrate, did your lawyers take any other action regarding your bail application?
Yes, they went to the higher courts and it went up to the highest court in this land, and the highest court acknowledged that there are no human rights laws in the Gambia. And that was reported in the papers everywhere. Amnesty International quoted it in the following year's annual report.
after these hearings, according to your earlier testimony, you appeared before the review panel. Could you remind us what happened at this review panel?
Yes, we appeared at the review panel where the chair, the Nigerian judge, Justice Obayan was the chair, and he was assisted by one Miss Jatuka, who was a state counsel at the time from the Attorney General Chambers, and the other panel members were ASP Jatabalde, and then there was Counsel Mustafa Marong, and also there was Imam Momodu Drame of Latrikunda. And as I indicated yesterday, they said they cannot do nothing. The only thing they can do is to recommend, but they just ask you how many wives you have, how many kids you have, how many number of years service. For me, I think it was just a futile exercise, and they were trying to copy what happened in '81 when there was a review panel to look at the various detainees who were detained. So this was just a charade.
Did they, at the panel, tell you the reasons for your detention?
No. They said they couldn't do anything.
Did they ask any questions that pertained to your activities as members of the security forces?
No, they didn't ask that.
Did they put anything on the table suggesting that you were accused of having committed any crimes or violation of any laws?
No, they didn't say that. I mean, the Nigerian judge, Justice Obayan, was a senior judge, so he knew that we have not committed crime. It's the other people who committed treason, not us. So nobody could have charged us for any security reason. In fact, there was an interview with Jammeh in the early days of the coup with BBC where he said, oh, the detainees committed treason. And I think it was Elizabeth Ohini who told him, how can they commit treason when they were defending the government of the day?
How did Jammeh respond to that?
Well, that's history. What else can he say?
Did he say anything at all?
I didn't remember. I didn't remember, yeah.
Okay, interesting. The next important date you mentioned in your diary was the 9th of May, 1995. This would have been after 10 months in detention. What happened?
Sorry, I said this 9 May 1995 was the eve of Tabaski, and you know this this Muslim feast, and always it was a tradition. If it's Eid al-Adha or if it's Christmas or in this feast, you know, during the First Republic, former President Jawara would release prisoners. So we thought that maybe there will be some prisoners released. And on this day, this was the day that Thomas Jaju came and took Captain Samsudin Sar, Chief Superintendent Turo Jaune, and Captain Durcham to the prison headquarters. And they were the lucky ones that day, and they were released that day.
How did you feel when you learned that at least 3 of your colleagues had been released?
Well, we were very happy for them. Obviously, we felt very disappointed. But for me, I always knew I will be the last person to come out, because for 2 reasons. I was one of the most senior people. After Press Judge, I was the most senior serviceman at the time. So I know I would be among the last batch. And secondly, with my skirmishes with the soldiers, I mean, I know they had a beef with me. So for me, deep down, I just said, you know, I leave it to Allah. But I knew I would not go home early.
Was there anything else about you, your personality, perhaps, that militated against your early release?
Well, everybody had personality. I know what you are alluding to. I was young, I had a high position, but I am proud. Nobody can accuse me of corruption.
Yes, please. Second.
Mr. Chongan, I recall yesterday you mentioned moments when...
Can you announce your name, please, for the transcribers? They had problems with that today.
Your name?
Commissioner Kinde. Chongan, I recall yesterday you mentioned that there were a number of moments when you were training Yaya, and even after his training, when he was working on the U, there were a number of moments when you had confrontations and sour relations. Don't you think that also may have contributed to, you confirming that you will be one of the last to go out?
Well, I mean, I don't know your explanation, how you articulated it. I did not have confrontation with him. I was his senior. And if he doesn't do something right, I have never done anything unjust or unfair to him.
No, certainly I know you were only performing your duty, but that may not go down well with him. And with this opportunity, I wonder if you would not come last.
I think the main purpose I came last because Jammeh was, to be frank, he was jealous and envious because he lived next door to me. I had a car, a beautiful car, a Pajero in those days. So obviously that is why he had the obsession of buying so many cars.
You may continue, Counsel.
Mr. Chongan, you had a nickname in the forces while you were a young soldier. What was it?
Well, you said it's a nickname. Yeah. I was called Dinding Manso or Bambaba. So, but, I mean, well, and I don't like that name. I'm not a Dinding anymore. That's why maybe Jammeh called himself Babili Mansa.
What does Dinding Manso mean?
Well, that's a Mandinka word for a young king or ruler, whatever. I'm sure the chairman knows it better than me.
Do you act like one in your younger days?
I cannot act like one. I was a serviceman subjected to military rules and regulations. The problem was military was young in the Gambia, and people did not understand the concept and the psyche of young officers. I mean, as young officers, as all of us, we had some moments of youthful exuberance. That's quite normal.
I won't ask you to elaborate on that.
Counsel, I'm not going to elaborate on that. I am leaving that to rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chongan. May we proceed to events of 1995, June 1995 to be precise. Could you talk about the events you recorded in your diary about 2nd June 1995?
2nd June 1995 would become a very sad day, but we woke up in the morning as usual. Now, remember, we are almost a year now in prison, so we are used to the routine. When you wake up in the morning, try to get some hot water and do the normal admin stuff. Then it was very sad. And obviously, in the prison, they always lock us up from noon to 2 o'clock, so that in the morning when we come out, if there is no tension, they will leave us till 12, and then they will lock us up from noon to 2 o'clock, and then they open us up. But we were there in the afternoon, and so the cells were reopened after 2 o'clock. And then around 4:45 p.m., we had shouts and cries from security wing number 1. Then there was a prison officer I called Seni. I'm not sure whether it was Seni Daba or something, but he was called Seni. He was a prison guard, and he was running from security wing number 1, coming to us at security wing number 4 to report to Sergeant Jawando who was a prison sergeant at that time, the chief commander of our area, and inform him of the death of Sadibu Haidara.
What happened after you had that information?
Well, we were sad, and then afterwards the prison authorities, I think it was Antu Seidi who came, and then afterwards Major Dennis Koka came, and then afterwards they took out the dead body, put it on a trolley. I still remember they covered it with a blue prison blanket, and they took the body away.
Prior to his death, did you have the chance to see him in the prison?
Yes, I mean, as I said, I know Haidara for a long time because he was in the Gendarmerie, and then we went to Turkey together. And I remember when he was in Turkey, he did have some medical problem until he was admitted at Haidar Pasha Military Hospital in Istanbul. And I remember we visited him, myself, Sirif Mbai, and others. We were there doing our course. And also, after the torture, he had some medical issues. I remember they used to take him to the...
Let's clear that issue. Which torture are you referring to?
Well, the torture, I said, when they were tortured, shortly after they were brought in under detention. I did testify that yesterday.
Who? Who do you refer to as
we are talking about Saibu Haidara and Sabali, Sana Sabali at the time.
According to your testimony yesterday, they were tortured on 2 separate occasions. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
After the tortures, continue your testimony?
Yes, then afterwards, Sadibu Haidara was sick, but this is much later, and they used to take him to the prison headquarters for Dr. Gay, Dr. Aliu Gay. I'm not sure whether Ali was the first name. Dr. Gay, the well-known Dr. Gay at RVH at the time, used to treat him. But the situation became so bad that on one occasion or so, Dr. Gay had to come right all the way to security number 1 to see him. And, you know, that time we are always sitting outside, and we saw he went. And at some point I did saw, it looked like his face was a little bit swollen shortly before he died.
Do you know whether he was taken to the hospital at all?
Well, I wouldn't know. Remember, we never go out of the prison. All you know is said that they went to the prison headquarters. So I wouldn't know. I cannot. I can only say what I've seen.
While you were there, did anybody else die in the prison?
No, no, I couldn't remember. Well, there would be people might die in the main yard, but for us, the security detainees, I didn't remember anybody dying.
Let's now move on to events of 15 June in your statement. What happened on this day?
On this day, Major Malik Njai, who is alias Pacha, who was the army doctor, Captain Ebrima Chongan, Corporal Alaji Kebe, and Captain Sana Sabali, they were summoned to the prison head office, and they were taken to the army headquarters, and they were informed that they would be court-martialed. Major Malik Njai was the most senior officer by rank in the military then, and he was in cell number 13, opposite my cell number 27. So he lamented that he couldn't understand what offense he may have committed. So he was, of course, right. And then obviously he was in a very distraught situation because not knowing what offense you've committed.
That's right. But before you continue your testimony on that, just allow me to take you back a little bit to the death of Haidara. We just need to establish whether you knew the cause of his death.
No, I wouldn't know the cause of his death. I'm not a doctor.
Did you hear anything having been said about the cause of his death?
Well, I wouldn't know. We were in prison. Obviously, there were rumors. People have different versions. Some people thought that he might have died as a result of the torture, or he might have natural conditions. But I wouldn't know. I'm in prison, and I'm not a doctor.
Did you hear the government announcement as to the cause of his death?
Counsel, remember, I was in prison. So I think those outside should be able to answer that.
The reason why I rate this is, okay, take a look at paragraph 45 of your statement. 162, yes. Take a look at paragraph 162.
Yes, I remember the Radio Gambia announced that Captain Sadiq Haidar died from chronic high blood pressure.
That is the point I wanted I wanted to establish.
Okay.
Okay. So now you were telling us about Kambi, Ebrima Kambi, Malik Njai Pacha, Major at the time, and Corporal Alaji Kebe. Did you know Alaji Kebe before?
Alaji Kebe, no, I did not know him. I came to know him in prison because he is from the army.
And what did you learn about him while in prison?
Well, Alaji Kebe was one of the victims of the November 11. He was shot and very sad, and he stayed in hospital for a while before he joined us at mile 2. And one of his legs is longer than the other. Very, very sad.
Do you by any chance know why one of his legs was longer than the other?
That was as a result of when they shot his leg. That's the cause of it.
So on this day, Alaji Kebe, Corporal Ebrima Kambi, Captain, and Major Malik Njai were summoned to Army headquarters June 15th and informed that they would be court-martialed. That is what you said earlier, correct?
Yes, and Sana Sabali was there also.
Were they eventually court-martialed, as far as you know?
No. On 25th of June, somehow, Major Malik Njai and Kambi's case were suddenly dropped. But Sana Sabali, his case was dropped, and he was eventually court-martialed and sentenced to a number of years in prison.
Do you know what happened to Alaji Kebe?
Alaji Kebe continued to be in prison, even to be in prison. He was there for a long time. I think we even left him there.